Well, Rally Day. I believe it's serendipitous that we're all here together today. We're connected in a very special way, and I believe you know what I'm talking about too. So whether it's a new love or relocation to a new home or a new job or a new idea that captures your imagination, we all know what it's like to be captured by a vision. And if you're going through only the motions of religion, then you can be connected to church in usual ways. And I know for a number of you, you're still finding it hard to believe that you're connected to any church at all. But here you are. And we have so many visitors who are interested in this different, progressive kind of church, who think maybe I could believe in something again, something bigger than myself. I could be part of a community like this. And if you're thinking that way, you're not alone. There have been others.
I'm David Letourneau, and I want to tell you a story about my mother. Many of you know her or have heard of her, Priscilla Nauman. My mother was sort of a wayward Catholic. At a certain point in time, she had given up on it after the abuses by the priest and just some things that just didn't work for her. So her routine got to be Sunday mornings were the cup of coffee and reading and just hanging out with the LA Times. So I had come to Church of Foothills maybe on 2 occasions at that point, and we talked every day. So I told my mother about this experience, how great it was, and invited her to come to the church, and she was like, I got my routine. I'm not doing this. Coffee in the LA Times. The only other time that routine was broken was when she found my brother sitting in the car with the car door open, listening to the radio asleep, actually drunk, and freaked out, and she didn't read it all the time. She just berated him the whole time. But she read this every morning on Sundays, and just finally I got through, and she came in, and she couldn't stop talking about it. And after that, attended. She was calling me. She was asking me, when are you going to be there? What time are we going to go? And then we would talk about these things. It was just a great transformation for my mother, and she had to shelve the LA Times for a little bit later in the day. But it was good.
Thank you, David. It's especially been hard, I know, for those in the gay, lesbian, transgender community, because the church has traditionally been exclusive. So Kevin Brewer joined our church 6 or 7 years ago, and I called Kevin and said, you got to share what you shared with me when you came here.
Can you hear me? Oh, good. My name is Kevin Brewer. When I came to the church first, I had never really been a member of a church. I did have gay friends, and we would go to other churches, but we'd often find that they weren't as accepting as we thought they were when we first visited, when they found out that we were a little different, that we were gay. So we didn't have a part of that life, that spiritual life, and figured, well, it's not for us, is it? We're excluded from it. But years later, I had gone by this church many times. I think it was a time when the services were a little bit later, 9:30. I thought, well, that's not that early on a Sunday. I'm going to go and try it. I've never been a member of a church, and I kind of didn't want to dive headfirst into the pool. I kind of, put my pinkies in to test the water a little bit, and I found out, this is a really neat thing. I've missed a lot by not having this in my life, and I found that it was a very accepting environment, very open. And open-hearted and open-minded. So I think it just offers a wonderful balance if you feel the need to grow spiritually and you want to be supported and challenged. This is a place for it. The world out there will help you with other things, your financial interests, your career and stuff like that. But what about your spiritual life? So I really feel that I made the right decision. It's still a surprise to be a member. There's no explaining it to my dad. Or my mom has passed away. I don't think she would understand it. She grew up in a very conservative environment. I think at one time when I told her a little bit about the church, she said, you need to go to one that has more fire and brimstone.
Thank you, Kevin.
And my dad knows that I go to church, but I don't think, if I said I was a member, he'd probably say, well, once in a while is okay, but don't make a habit of it. Okay. So anyway, I think that's all I have to say. I think if you're thinking about it, test the waters, and it's a wonderful place.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks.
Thank you. And David Roger, remember when he came to our church, he had that look on his face like, I don't believe you. He was just, I'm only here because Richard dragged me here. And now he's the vice president of our church, and he co-chairs the Global Ministries Committee for the UCC and the DOC of all of Southern California. So you just never know what's... And one more quick story. Last year we did a wedding for 2 women, and right before their August wedding, and they came for Easter. And I happened to make a comment that year that I think I had been in church every Easter in my life. And afterwards, she came to me with tears in her eyes and said, this is the first time I've been in church on Easter because I never thought I was welcome. So lots of stories. These stories, folks, are not by accident. The Spirit is forever tapping at the window of our consciousness, and all we have to do is open the windows. Here at Church of the Foothills, we are participating in what is a new community worldwide. And that is communities that are more open and affirming, committed to peace, nonviolence, justice, which is compassion in action in the world. And we want to be a spiritual community as well. And that's what I want to emphasize today. Spirituality as a response to a higher calling is nothing new. It's been around a long time. The Jewish mystics, they talked about everything that's created and contains the spark of the divine. The Hindus, they take great pleasure in ordinary things as manifestations of the divine. The Sufi teacher Khan once wrote, everything in life is speaking, communicating, in spite of its apparent silence. And those of you who came out of Catholic tradition, that heritage, with its beads and its candles and its incense, that's trying to link the spiritual to the everyday life and draw our attention to the divine. And the great medieval Christian mystic Meister Eckhart, who once said, to grasp God in all things is a sign of your new birth. What is new is the fact that millions of people around the world in all kinds of religious traditions, even those without religion, are waking up to their co-creating partnership with the Spirit. Many folks are now doing it outside of organized religion. Some of us still believe, though, that the church can be a genuine path to the spirit world. And this reading from Luke's Gospel today is a very insightful statement from Jesus. Because when he's asked by the contemporary rabbis, the religious leaders, how do we know where God is in the realm of the divine? When is this peace and justice world coming? Jesus made a distinction between religion and spirituality. The religious mindset often wants to look to the outside for divine wisdom. The religious people of Jesus' day were saying, do we look over there for God? Do we look over here? But the spiritual response is no. You look within. Where religion often ends up holding authority over its followers, the spiritual movement encourages people to recognize their own spiritual power. Where religion often teaches its followers that spirituality can only be found within a tightly bound range of experiences and beliefs, the spiritual life, and it took me a long time to learn this, invites you to see all of life as an incredible miracle. And every one of us is a lead actor in this play. Religion is wonderful at times. It can be about tradition, but it tends also to be about status quo. Spirituality is about adventure. We just have to learn to get out of our own way sometimes. As the Catholic theologian and missionary to China and the world-class paleontologist Teilhard de Chardin once wrote, "We are not a human being having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." So what is spirituality? Well, you don't find it by saying, well, go look over there or look here. It's within you. It's just waiting our attention. We don't find spirit so much as we just wake up to it. When we do wake up to the reality that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, then everything can become a moment of sacredness to us. All of nature in particular, we realize, is part of us, part of our kin. We're connected. It's something we're connected to, not to be exploited. And didn't our Native Americans try to teach us that a long time ago? That everything about nature can be our teacher and help us realize that our lives are part of the whole system of something much bigger than ourselves. So if the call to change the world sounds too large to you, and I hear that sometimes, Pastor Mike, you want us to change the world. How do we do that? If that seems a bit removed from your daily life, well then consider first and foremost that spirituality is connected to changing your own world, changing my world, and changing the way we see and interact with the world. For we're all participating in the evolution of the universe, and it's moving toward higher and higher consciousness. Satish Kumar is a spiritual activist. I love that designation. He initially thought that spirituality meant that you retreat from the world. But he grew into a whole new understanding. He grew up in India, in the Jain religion, or the Jain religion. I've heard it called both ways. And that tradition is very much in tune with nature. It's very eco-friendly. They even carry little brooms in the past to make sure they don't step on an ant when they walk. Prince Siddhartha, you might remember, tried Jainism for 5 years before he gained enlightenment and became the Buddha. And then later, Buddhism incorporated much of the ethics of Jainism into the Buddhist practices. Our young people here at the church, through the Interfaith Council, have visited the Jain temple over in Buena Park. And all of us could learn much from our Jain neighbors. Well, anyway, at age 4, Satish's father died. And that caused him, he said, to question, is there any meaning and purpose to life? At age 9, if you can imagine, he left home and spent the next 9 years walking through forests and villages with the Jains. But he was very careful when he did that, not to leave any imprint on the earth. He took his Jain vows very seriously to renounce the ways of the world and to live in communion only with nature. But when he was 18, he had an encounter with Gandhi. And he said it changed his whole outlook on spirituality, because Gandhi told him that spirituality should make him more involved in the world, not retreat from the world. So he set out on a different walking pilgrimage. Satish walked 8,000 miles to visit the leaders of the heads of all the countries that have nuclear weapons. He went to Moscow, London, D.C., Beijing. And upon arriving at every country, he presented a tea bag to the leaders. And he said to them, if ever you get to the point where you are tempted to launch a nuclear war, I want you to pause and drink a cup of tea instead. Well, intuitively, I hope we've learned we can't do spirituality alone. We need other kindred spirits to create change. And that's why our participation in a community of faith like this is so important. Spirituality is deeply personal, yet we're lost without the community of kindred spirits to sharpen us, inspire us, challenge us. So there has to be this balance between your personal spirituality and community. Let me illustrate it with a kind of funny story. There was a young rabbi right out of the seminary. He was conducting his first service at the synagogue. It was going pretty well until they got to the prayer time. Suddenly, half the congregation stood up for the prayer time. The other half stayed seated and shouted at the others, "Sit down." This went on at the next service and the next service. And the young rabbi, his training had not prepared him to handle this kind of conflict. So he sought out the advice of an elder member of the synagogue, a woman who had been there since birth, been there 70 years. And the rabbi asked the senior minister, "You know the traditions here intimately. Please tell me, is it the congregation's tradition to stand during the prayer time?" "No," said the older woman. "That's not the tradition." "Well, is the tradition then to be seated?" the rabbi asked. "No," said the woman, "that's not the tradition either." By this point, the young rabbi is kind of beside himself. He says, "But half the congregation stands for prayer, the other half stays seated and yells at the other ones." And she said, "That's the tradition." The point being, trying to lead an inclusive and diverse spiritual community is sometimes like pushing a wheelbarrow full of frogs. Particularly in this church, because we're free spirits, congregationalists, nonconformists. We don't like being told what to do or to think or believe. Can I get an amen on that one? Some of you prefer standing and some of you like to sit. Some of you are very expressive. I see you dancing during the music. Others like to sit quietly and peacefully. But we have, and we agree on some core spiritual values, like inclusion, living with intellectual integrity, and having mindfulness that what's really important is peace and compassion, respect for all, including nature. Beyond that, our church is a kind of laboratory. This is a place we practice the art of give and take. And I just ask you to give a little more than you take, and that way the church keeps growing. Alice Walker, the great author of The Color Purple, she once said, "To tell the truth, have you ever found God in church? Any God I ever felt in church, I brought in with me. And I think all the other folks did too. They come to church not to find God, but to share God." And she also said, "I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it." We all want to believe in something. We all want to be connected to something bigger than ourselves. And that sense of being a part of something larger, it goes by a lot of different names in the world's religions. God, Goddess, Christ in our Christian tradition, the Spirit. For some modern folks, maybe universal consciousness or energy. However you live out your spirituality, it's my job to remind you that this church offers an awesome opportunity for you to be in tune with something larger than your limited perspective and discovering a larger vision of yourself when you're in a relationship with these special people. But none of that's going to happen unless you participate regularly. So I invite you this year to grow as a spiritual being in this very spiritual but not too religious place we call Church of the Foothills. Amen.